The fine drizzle tapped a hypnotic rhythm against the windshield of Ryan's old pickup truck as he drove down the rural North Carolina highway. The heavy gray sky mirrored his mood. For months, the local circus, once a source of nostalgic joy, had become a place of sadness. Rumors of abandoned and neglected animals circulated through the small community, but no one had the courage to investigate. Ryan, an army veteran with a heart as big as his temper, felt a duty to go. He parked his truck next to a rusty iron gate and got out, the air thick with the smell of wet earth and decay. The silence of the place was unnerving, broken only by the wind howling through torn tents and empty cages. Suddenly, a faint cry echoed in the distance. Ryan followed the sound, past broken carousels and collapsed awnings, until he reached a secluded area of the camp. There, he saw a sight that squeezed his heart: a baby elephant, visibly thin and frightened, chained to a wooden post. The heavy, rusted chains seemed to suffocate the small creature, its large, sorrowful eyes fixed on Ryan. He approached slowly, speaking in a calm, reassuring tone. "It's okay, little one. I'm here to help." The calf, whom Ryan affectionately named Ilara, flinched but didn't move. The scratch marks on the ground around the post told a story of struggle and desperation. The chains were secured with a solid, rusted padlock. Ryan knew it wouldn't be easy to free her. He needed tools, and more importantly, a plan. He looked around, searching for anything he could use. It was then that he saw him. Not far away, in a dark, forgotten cage, lay a lion. He was massive, with a majestic mane, but the look in his eyes was one of a defeated beast. Ryan felt a pang of compassion. It was as if the lion, whom he called Leo, was observing the little elephant's plight with the same helplessness he felt. It was a moment of silent connection, a shared understanding of despair in that desolate place. Ryan knew he had to save both of them. His mission had just grown larger and far more dangerous. He pulled out his phone, knowing he couldn't do this alone, and began to dial, his gaze fixed on the cage. If you're enjoying this story, be sure to subscribe to the channel for more content. Remember, this is a fictional story, and the events are not real. The call to animal control was met with skepticism and a promise that they would look into it, a phrase Ryan knew was a polite dismissal. Frustrated but undeterred, he called his old friend Maya. Maya was a veterinary technician with a soft spot for lost causes and a pragmatic streak that often balanced Ryan's impulsive nature. She listened patiently as he described the scene, her voice a calming presence on the other end of the line. "A baby elephant and a lion. Ryan, are you sure?" she asked, her tone a mix of disbelief and concern. He assured her he was. "Meet me there," he said, and hung up before she could protest. He spent the next hour gathering supplies from his truck, a heavy-duty bolt cutter, a bucket of water, some dried fruit he had for his lunch, and a thick rope. He approached Ilara again, placing the bucket of water a safe distance from her. She eyed him cautiously, but, driven by thirst, she finally took a hesitant drink. He then tossed a few pieces of fruit toward her, which she devoured instantly. The small act of kindness seemed to soften her demeanor. Her ears, once flattened in fear, perked up slightly as she watched him. Just as he was about to try and approach the lion, Maya's car pulled up. She got out, a small first aid kit in hand, and her eyes widened as she took in the sight of Ilara and the lion's cage. "Oh my God, Ryan," she whispered, her voice laced with a mix of shock and sadness. "You weren't exaggerating." They worked together, their movements slow and deliberate, to gain the trust of Ilara. Maya, with her gentle voice and expertise, was a natural with the elephant. They fed her more fruit, slowly closing the distance between them. Ilara's trust was a fragile thing, but it was there. They knew they had to act fast. The state of the animals was deteriorating, and the circus owner could return at any moment. The bolt cutters were heavy in Ryan's hand, but as he moved towards the chains, Ilara tensed, her eyes wide with panic. She let out a soft cry, a sound that seemed to awaken the lion. Leo, who had been observing from his cage, suddenly stood up. He let out a low growl, a sound that seemed to both warn Ryan and calm Ilara. It was as if the lion, in his own way, was telling the elephant that it was okay to trust these humans. The connection between the two animals, born of shared suffering, was becoming clearer, and it was a bond that would be instrumental in their rescue. With the lion's low growl as a surprising form of encouragement, Ryan cautiously moved closer to the baby elephant. The sound seemed to have a calming effect on Ilara, who stopped her restless pacing and watched him with a new, tentative trust. Maya whispered instructions. "Slow and steady, Ryan. Don't make any sudden moves." He nodded, his hands sweating on the heavy bolt cutters. The rust on the chains flaked off as he positioned the tool. With a loud metallic snap, the first link broke. Ilara flinched but didn't pull away. He repeated the process, and soon one of her front legs was free. The elephant calf let out a soft huff of relief, testing the newfound freedom of her limb. But the heavy, rusted collar around her neck remained. This was the most dangerous part. He had to get close enough to cut it without startling her. Maya, with her calming voice, distracted Ilara with a handful of fresh hay she had found in a nearby stall. As Ilara munched on the hay, Ryan carefully approached her neck. The heavy steel of the bolt cutters cold against her warm skin. He cut the last chain, and the collar fell to the ground with a dull thud. Ilara was finally free. Her freedom, however, was tinged with a new kind of panic. Without the familiar weight of the chains, she seemed disoriented. She shuffled her feet, looking at her free legs, then at the open space around her. She let out a cry, not of pain, but of confusion. It was then that Ryan heard another sound, a much more threatening one, a low, menacing growl. The circus owner, a man named Marcus, with a face as weathered as the circus tents, was standing near the lion's cage. He held a rusty pitchfork and a scowl that promised trouble. "What are you doing here?" Marcus snarled, his eyes darting from Ilara to Ryan and Maya. "These are my animals!" Ryan stood his ground, placing himself between Marcus and the now free elephant. "These animals were abandoned and neglected," Ryan said, his voice firm. "We're taking them." Marcus let out a harsh laugh. "You're taking them, and who's going to stop me from calling the cops on you for trespassing?" It was a tense standoff, and Ryan knew they were in a precarious position, but he wasn't about to back down. He had freed the elephant, and he wasn't leaving without the lion. If you're enjoying this story, remember to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any new videos. This is a fictional story and is not based on real events. The standoff with Marcus was interrupted by an unexpected force, Leo. The lion, sensing the tension and the threat to Ilara, let out a thunderous roar from his cage. The sound was so powerful, it rattled the rusted bars and sent a shiver down Marcus's spine. The circus owner, startled, stumbled backward, dropping his pitchfork. In that moment of surprise, Ryan acted. He grabbed the bolt cutters and rushed to the lion's cage. Maya, understanding his intention, quickly moved to distract Marcus, talking loudly and pointing to Ilara. "Look at her condition!" Maya exclaimed, her voice firm. "You can't deny she was neglected. We have proof of animal cruelty." Marcus, still reeling from the lion's roar, was momentarily off balance. It was the window of opportunity Ryan needed. The lock on Leo's cage was old and rusty, and a single, well-placed snap of the bolt cutters was all it took. The cage door swung open with a groan of protest. Leo, however, did not immediately rush out. He stood in the doorway, his eyes fixed on Ryan. It was a test of trust. Ryan, without a moment of hesitation, held out his hand, palm up, a gesture of peace and respect. "It's okay, Leo," he said softly. "You're free." The lion, after a long, assessing moment, stepped out of the cage. He was a magnificent creature, bigger and more powerful than Ryan had imagined. But his movements were not aggressive. He moved with a quiet dignity, his gaze still on Ryan. Marcus, finally regaining his composure, picked up the dropped pitchfork and advanced menacingly. "I'll call the authorities on you. You can't just steal my animals," he shouted, his face red with rage. But he had not anticipated what happened next. As Marcus took a step forward, Leo moved. The lion, with a low growl, placed himself between Ryan, Maya, and the circus owner. It was a clear, unambiguous act of protection. The bond they had formed, forged in the shared trauma of their situation, was now a powerful, undeniable force. Marcus, faced with the full presence of a massive lion, finally understood the gravity of the situation. He retreated, leaving them alone with the newly freed animals. With Marcus gone, a new kind of tension filled the air. Ryan, Maya, Ilara, and Leo were left in the desolate circus grounds, a fragile, unlikely family. The immediate danger had passed, but the challenges ahead were immense. They had two large, traumatized animals on their hands, and nowhere to go. Maya, ever the pragmatist, was already making plans. "We can't take them back to my clinic. It's not equipped for this," she said, her eyes scanning the horizon. "We need a sanctuary, a place with open space." Ryan thought of his old friend, a retired farmer named Samuel, who lived on a sprawling property nearby. Samuel was a quiet, kind man who had a deep respect for all living things. It was a long shot, but it was their only option. They had to transport the animals, and that was a monumental task. The baby elephant, while small for her species, was still a large animal, and the lion, though cooperative, was still a wild predator. Ryan fashioned a makeshift leash from the rope he had brought, carefully and slowly looping it around Ilara's neck. She trusted him enough to allow it. For Leo, it was a different matter. He walked alongside them, his powerful body a constant, watchful presence. The group began the slow journey back to Ryan's truck. As they walked, they noticed something remarkable. Ilara would occasionally touch Leo's massive paw with her trunk, a silent gesture of affection and security. The lion would respond with a soft purr, a sound that rumbled deep in his chest. Their bond was more than just a shared experience. It was a profound, unspoken friendship. They managed to get Ilara into the bed of the pickup, a difficult task that took all of Ryan and Maya's strength. Leo, however, refused to be confined. He walked beside the truck, a silent guardian, as Ryan drove slowly and carefully down the road. It was an impossible sight, a pickup truck carrying a baby elephant, with a lion trotting alongside it down a rural North Carolina road. They drove towards Samuel's farm, their hope resting on the kindness of a friend and the strength of a bond they had only just begun to understand. Arriving at Samuel's farm was a moment of profound relief. The sprawling property was a patchwork of green pastures and dense woods, a stark contrast to the sterile decay of the circus. Samuel, a man with a kind face and hands gnarled from years of farming, watched in stunned silence as Ryan's truck pulled up. The sight of a baby elephant in the back and a lion walking beside it was an unprecedented spectacle. "Ryan, what in the world?" Samuel began, his voice a mix of disbelief and concern. Ryan quickly explained the situation, his words tumbling out in a rush. He told Samuel about the abandoned circus, the neglect, and the unlikely bond between the two animals. Samuel listened patiently, his gaze shifting from Ilara to Leo. "They're a family, Sam," Ryan concluded. "They need a home, a safe place to heal." Samuel, after a long moment of consideration, looked at Ryan, then at the animals. A slow smile spread across his face. "Well," he said, his voice soft but firm, "it looks like we've got ourselves a couple of new residents. The old barn is empty, and there's a few acres of pasture that haven't been used in years. It's not a proper sanctuary, but it's a start." Ryan and Maya let out a collective sigh of relief. The animals were safe for now. The next few days were a flurry of activity. Ryan and Maya worked tirelessly to make the old barn habitable for the animals. They built a secure enclosure for Leo, a large open space that allowed him to roam, but kept him safely separated from the farm's other animals. For Ilara, they created a warm, comfortable stall, lined with hay and a large bucket of fresh water. The two animals, though in separate spaces, continued to communicate. Ilara would trumpet softly from her stall, and Leo would respond with a low purr. Their bond was a constant, comforting presence on the farm, but the physical and emotional scars of their past were still present. Ilara was still skittish, flinching at sudden movements, and Leo, despite his calm demeanor, carried a deep sadness in his eyes. Their journey to healing was just beginning, but for the first time in a long time, they were safe and surrounded by people who cared. Weeks turned into a month, and the trio's routine at Samuel's farm settled into a rhythm. Ryan, Maya, and Samuel worked together, dedicating their time to the healing of Ilara and Leo. The animals, in turn, began to show signs of recovery. Ilara, with a steady diet and the freedom to move, began to regain her strength. She grew a little bigger, a little bolder. She would often follow Ryan and Maya around the pasture, her trunk gently nudging their backs in a show of affection. Leo, too, was transforming. The sadness in his eyes was slowly being replaced by a spark of life. He spent his days in the open enclosure, basking in the sun and watching the world go by. His low purrs and occasional roars became a familiar sound on the farm, a reminder of the wild spirit they had helped to save. But the bond between the two animals remained the most remarkable thing. They would stand at the fence that separated their enclosures, their forms a silhouette against the setting sun. Ilara would reach her trunk through the fence, gently touching Leo's face, and he would lean into her touch. It was a silent, powerful testament to their shared history and their deep affection for one another. However, their peaceful new life was threatened by a new, unexpected danger. One evening, as Ryan and Maya were closing up the barn, they received a call from a local animal welfare organization. They had heard about the two animals and, believing them to be a danger to the community, were coming to take them to a city zoo. The news hit them like a physical blow. A zoo, especially a small city one, would be no different from the circus, a place of confinement, not a home. Ryan and Maya knew they had to fight. The next morning, the animal welfare officials arrived, accompanied by a small police presence. They were met not with resistance, but with a silent, powerful show of defiance. Ryan, Maya, and Samuel stood together, a united front. As the officials moved toward the enclosures, Ilara let out a loud, angry trumpet. Leo, in a show of incredible loyalty, roared, a sound so full of power and authority that the officials hesitated, their faces pale. The animals, in their own way, were telling them that they would not be moved. The standoff with the animal welfare officials was a tense and nerve-wracking affair. The officials, led by a stern, no-nonsense woman named Agent Davis, had the cold demeanor of someone who had seen it all and was immune to emotional pleas. She insisted that the animals were a public safety risk and, according to state law, needed to be moved to a more controlled, professional environment. "These are not pets," she stated flatly, her gaze sweeping over the makeshift enclosures. "They are wild animals. We have a protocol for this, and we must follow it for the safety of the public and the animals themselves." Ryan, however, stood his ground, his voice rising with passion as he spoke. He didn't just see a lion and an elephant, he saw two souls who had found each other. "You can't just separate them," he pleaded, his hands gesturing toward the fence where Ilara and Leo stood in quiet solidarity. "They're a family. You can see the bond they have. It would be a crime to put them back in a cage, to tear them apart after they've finally found peace." Maya stepped forward, presenting a binder filled with meticulously kept medical records and photographs. She detailed Ilara's weight gain, the healing of her scars, and the improvement in Leo's coat and overall demeanor. "These aren't just animals in a field," she explained. "They're patients. We've been providing them with consistent care, and their recovery is proof that this is the right environment for them." Samuel, in his quiet, resolute way, simply pointed to the farm's peaceful surroundings. "They're not a threat," he said, his voice carrying the weight of his years. "They're just two creatures who found solace in each other, and they've found a home here." But Agent Davis was unmoved. "The law is the law," she said, her voice an unyielding wall. "We have to follow protocol." Just as it seemed all hope was lost, and Ryan's pleas were falling on deaf ears, a new sound filled the air. A small crowd of local townspeople who had heard the rumors and seen Ryan's heartfelt social media posts about the animals began to gather at the edge of the property. They carried signs that read, "Save Ilara and Leo," and "A home, not a cage." They were not a mob, they were a community, and they had come to support Ryan and his cause. The sight of them, a sea of familiar faces and unwavering support, gave Ryan a renewed sense of purpose. He realized this wasn't just his fight anymore, it was their fight. Agent Davis, faced with the growing crowd and the unwavering determination of Ryan and his friends, finally began to waver. She knew that forcibly taking the animals in front of the community would be a public relations nightmare, a story that would go viral for all the wrong reasons. She pulled Ryan aside, her voice dropping to a low, conspiratorial tone. "I'll make you a deal," she said, her eyes fixed on his. "We'll give you a month. If you can raise enough money to build a proper, professional sanctuary, one that meets all our safety and welfare standards, we'll leave them be. But if you fail, we're taking them." "Do we have a deal?" Ryan, without a moment of hesitation, agreed. He knew it was an almost impossible task, raising that much money and building a professional facility in just 30 days. But with the support of his friends and the entire community, he felt a new kind of hope. The crowd cheered as Agent Davis and her team left, a temporary victory that had come at a high price. Now, the real work began. The next 4 weeks were a blur of activity, a whirlwind of fundraising, building, and community organizing. Ryan, Maya, and Samuel launched a campaign they named Sanctuary for Ilara and Leo, creating a website and social media pages that shared the animals' story. The local community responded with an outpouring of generosity that humbled them. Small donations poured in from all corners of the town. Bake sales were organized by local businesses, and volunteer builders, carpenters, and even welders offered their services for free. The story of the veteran, the vet tech, the farmer, the elephant, and the lion had captured the hearts of the town, and they were all determined to help. Ryan and his friends spent every waking moment building. They tore down old fences and put up new ones, using the donated materials to create a massive, sprawling enclosure that would be a true home for Ilara and Leo. They built a large, heated shelter for the animals, a place where they could be safe and warm during the cold North Carolina winters. The community's support was their fuel, their motivation to keep going even when they were tired and felt the immense weight of the task. Neighbors would drop off food and water, children would draw pictures of Ilara and Leo and tape them to the barn, and every day someone new would show up, ready to lend a hand. As the deadline loomed, a new and unexpected challenge arose, a moral dilemma that tested their resolve. A major animal rights organization, seeing the success of their campaign and the powerful story behind it, reached out. They were impressed by Ryan's efforts and the community's support, and they offered to help. But their help came with a catch. They wanted to move Ilara and Leo to their main sanctuary, a massive, state-of-the-art facility thousands of miles away. It was a tempting offer, a promise of permanent safety, professional veterinary care, and an environment perfectly suited for the animals. but it would mean separating the animals from their newfound home, from the people who had saved them, and from the community that had fought so hard for them. Ryan was torn. He knew, logically, that the larger sanctuary was probably the best thing for them in the long run. They could provide care and resources that he, Maya, and Samuel never could, but the thought of tearing them away from the place where they had finally found peace was heartbreaking. He looked at Ilara, playfully nudging a log with her trunk, and at Leo, watching her from his enclosure with a look of pure contentment. He knew he couldn't make this decision alone. He gathered Maya and Samuel, and together they faced the most difficult choice of their journey, the choice between a perfect facility and a true home. The final decision was made with a heavy heart, but a clear purpose. After a long, emotional conversation, Ryan, Maya, and Samuel decided that the best thing for Ilara and Leo was to stay. They declined the offer from the large animal rights organization, choosing to trust in the sanctuary they had built and the community that had supported them. They had created a home, not just a facility, and they knew the animals' emotional well-being was just as important as their physical health. The community, upon hearing their decision, rallied around them once more, not with money this time, but with pledges of continued support and an overwhelming sense of pride. On the final day of the deadline, Agent Davis returned. She was met not with fear, but with a sense of quiet determination. She walked through the new, spacious sanctuary, her eyes taking in the heated shelters, the lush pastures, and the clear signs of care and love. She saw Ilara and Leo, now healthy and happy, their bond as strong as ever. The two animals, once sad and defeated, were now a picture of peace and contentment. They watched her with calm, curious eyes, no longer showing the fear that had defined their past. Agent Davis finally turned to Ryan, a small, genuine smile on her face. "You did it," she said, her voice filled with a newfound respect. "This isn't just a passable enclosure. This is a true sanctuary. These animals are safe here." The paperwork was signed, the threat was gone, and Ilara and Leo were officially home. The years that followed were a testament to the power of kindness and community. Ilara grew into a magnificent elephant, and Leo's wild spirit was fully restored. They lived out their days together, two unlikely friends who had found each other in a moment of despair and had been saved by the unwavering love of a man, a vet, a farmer, and an entire town. Their story, born of a rusted circus cage and an old pickup truck, became a legend, a reminder that the most profound bonds are often forged in the most unexpected places. It was a story of hope, of survival, and of the incredible, unbreakable bond between a man and the animals he fought so hard to save.